Hello, it's 10 p.m. in Washington, 3 a.m. in London, 6 in the morning in Nairobi, where hopes are higher than they have been all year of a resolution to the election crisis that's taken 1,500 lives and left hundreds of thousands homeless. The crucial words, "We have a deal," as President Mwai Kibaki and opposition leader Raila Odinga signed a power-sharing agreement. They were pushed into partnership by the firm hand of Kofi Annan. The big question is, will they stay together once he's gone? From Nairobi, here's Adam Minot.
The two men, who've been at loggerheads for the past 2 months, sat and signed an agreement charting a way forward. Both President Kibaki and the opposition leader, Raila Odinga, have made concessions to reach this point. What they signed up to, under the mediation of Kofi Annan, was shared power. Both agreed that the country needs to use this deal to help put an end to ethnic hatred, which has deeply scarred the country.
This process has reminded us that as a nation, there are more issues that unite than divide us.
With the signing of this agreement, we have opened a new chapter in our country's history. From the era of face of confrontation to the beginning of cooperation.
The former UN Secretary-General has pushed for the creation of a new post of Prime Minister, essential in shifting some executive authority and creating genuine power sharing. He said that leadership in the midst of a crisis had been the key to agreement.
In all successful negotiations, there is give and take. Invariably, some supporters on each side feel that their negotiators gave too much. To those people in Kenya, I would say this: compromise was necessary for the survival of this country.
Kofi Annan said the whole country must now show character and resolve to put divisions behind them.
This election crisis has plunged Kenya into its darkest and most dangerous days since independence more than 40 years ago. It has stirred up intercommunal antipathy and anger on unprecedented levels.
The violence, which has subsided in recent days while talks have been underway, has killed more than 1,000 people and driven hundreds of thousands from their homes. It has left in its wake hatred and suspicion, which will continue to haunt Kenya unless deep-seated reform and institutional change in the country can be carried out. Adam Minot, BBC News, Nairobi.
And we'll be taking a closer look at that power-sharing deal later in the programme. But first, now back to our main story, the power-sharing deal struck in Kenya to end the country's political crisis. Dr. Joel Barkin was in Kenya to monitor the December elections. He said President Kibaki and Raila Odinga had to strike this deal.
It worked out because both sides were reaching what is called a hurtful stalemate. President Kibaki and his social base, particularly the business community and the Kikuyu, who have been mainly the victims of this, that is his main ethnic group, were suffering greatly. He was trying to essentially tough it out because he was the incumbent, but eventually he had to cede to the demands of his own community, and of course recognizing the fact, which is nicely stated in the agreement, that neither he nor Raila Odinga can govern without the other or govern by themselves.
And the international community really came together here, determined not to see Kenya fall apart.
It did indeed. This is one of the marvelous things about this. The international community came together really at two levels. First of all, Africa. Rarely do you see this kind of a consensus among African heads of state. First, John Kufuor, the president of Ghana, visited Kenya, then Kofi Annan, who's been there the last month, and then just to pull the agreement together at the last moment, Jakaya Kikwete, the young, recently elected president of Tanzania, flying in. And then more broadly at the international level, very close coordination between the United States, the United Kingdom, and the European Union, which included, by the way, both carrots and sticks, and visits to Kenya by Mark Malloch Brown, the Deputy Foreign Secretary of Great Britain, and Condoleezza Rice, the Secretary of State, obviously, of the United States.
I suppose the pressure has to stay, because the obvious question is, will it stick?
The pressure has to stay, particularly over the long run. I think in the short run, the deal that has been announced, because it's been public, because it requires an act of Parliament, and because a Parliament, which was also elected in the recent elections, is eager to reconvene, that part of the deal will stick. The real question is, going beyond the immediate power sharing, There are some very thorny constitutional issues in Kenya, such as the reconstitution of the Electoral Commission of Kenya, perhaps a change in the electoral system itself, certainly procedures, because you cannot run a new election in Kenya unless the loopholes which caused the fraud in the recent elections are tied up. And then secondly, the issue of devolution, whether Kenya might become a federal state to accommodate the smaller ethnic groups. And finally, land. Land is the big issue. It's been around since the end of the settler era. It's since the end of the colonial period.
Dr. Joel Barkin there. And what do you think about what's been happening in Kenya? You've been sending your views in to the BBC's website. Here are just a few of them. Kanda in Nairobi says power sharing should work, but we Kenyans are just not interested in it for its own sake. This should lead to us overhauling our constitution and making it relevant to today's Kenya. Jonas in Seattle here in the States tells us Kenya doesn't need a prime minister. A presidency is what's needed. I doubt this agreement is going to work. These men will continue fighting over who does what. And finally, Tesfa in San Diego maintains it won't work simply because the agreement did not come as the result of solving the fundamental issue of vote rigging. It came rather because of pressure from outside influences. Do keep those comments coming.